Alright, these are your notes for section 6.4 on completing the square. Now, completing the square is a process that you can use on any quadratic and you can get the roots for it. Most of the time we use it for non-factorable quadratics because it takes more work to get the answers, and if we can factor it, factoring it's something we're familiar with, we're really easy. It's easy for a lot of us, so we can use that method instead. But we can use completing the square. Now, it uses a specific set of skills, things that aren't that difficult, and I'll walk you through how to do them all, but when we put them all together, it makes the process a little confusing. So, what this first video does is it's going to walk you through each of the skills you need to have in order to complete the square, using the process of completing the square, and then we'll finish with an example where it combines everything together and it does a completing the square problem. Okay. So, the first thing you need to know how to do is how to factor, and I've given you two problems here on factoring. Now remember, factoring has to have three terms. We're going to use x factoring, maybe that's more specific. We're going to x factor these, so they need to have three terms. We draw an x, a times c goes on top, which in this case is 9, 1 times 9 is 9, and b goes on the bottom, which here is 6. Now you need to determine the two side numbers, what multiplies to the top, what two numbers multiply to the top but add to the bottom. Well, two numbers that multiply to 9 are 3 and 3. And we can use our shortcut here. So we jump right into x plus 3 times x plus 3. Now, all of your problems will end up being like this. And if you remember back to when we talked about factoring, you can take this and make it x plus 3 squared. Your problems today, when you do completing the square, should end up being like that, where you can rewrite so that it's a square, a term, two terms, the numbers on your side of your x, should be the same. When you go to write them in factored form, they should have the same parentheses on both, and then you can rewrite it as one set of parentheses squared. So let's look at our next example. Same idea here. We're going to factor this. We draw our x. 49 on top, 14 on the bottom, two numbers that multiply to 49 but add to 14, 7 and 7. Rewrite it using our shortcut, x plus 7 times x plus 7, and we can rewrite that as x plus 7 squared. Okay? So if you understand this, great. That's the first skill you're going to have to know. We're going to move on to the next skill. And this skill says fill in the blank and factor. So what we want to do is we want to fill in this blank here with something so that we can x factor it and get an answer in parentheses squared. And I'm going to show you how to do that. This is part of the tricky part that you have to remember. What you do is you cut this in half. So 10 divided by 2 is 5. And then we square that and it goes here. Okay? So the number in the middle, divide by 2, take that answer, square it, and it fills in the blank. Now I can x factor this, 25 on top, 10 on the bottom, two numbers that multiply to 25 but add to 10, well those are 5 and 5, that's x plus 5, and x plus 5, which becomes x plus 5 squared. And that's what we want to do. Okay? This is the second skill you're going to have to know, and again this is one of the trickier ones. So, let's look at our next example. We have x squared minus 24x, and then a blank, and we want to rewrite it, fill in that blank and rewrite it so it's a set of parentheses squared. Again, we divide this by 2, gives us negative 12. We square that, and we get 144. Now if I want to x factor this, put 144 on the top, negative 24 on the bottom. My two numbers end up being negative 12 and negative 12. So x minus 12 be x minus 12 times x minus 12. They're the same, so I can make it x minus 12 squared. Okay, that's the second skill. Again, whatever the middle term is, divide it by 2, and then square it, and that fills in your blank, and then you can x factor it. For this one, we're just going to fill in the blank, but this is a little different because it's an equation. And if you have an equation, you have to keep whatever you do to one side, you have to do to the other. So we're going to use the same process we did in the skill above it, but there's one extra step to this, okay? So we're going to fill in the blank first. Remember to fill in the blank, divide by 2, that's negative 4. Negative 8 divided by 2 is negative 4, and we square that, so we get plus 16. Now I added this 16 here, so I have to add 16 to the other side because it's an equation. Whatever I do to the left, I have to do to the right. So I end up getting x squared minus 8x plus 16 equals 15 plus 16 is 31. Okay? So that's the next skill we have to know. I want you to realize whatever you do to one side, you have to do to the other. So let's look at our next example. We're going to fill in the blank again. So we cut this in half. 26 divided by 2 is 13. We're going to square that. 13 squared is 169. So I added that here. That means I have to add 169 to the other side. So I end up with x squared plus 26x plus 169 equals, and then I have 71 plus 169 is 240. Now this can x factor, okay, because it's what we did in the skill above it. So 169 on top, 26 on the bottom, two numbers that multiply to 169 but add to 26, 13 and 13. So I end up with x plus 13 times x plus 13 gives me x plus 13 squared, and that equals 240. Okay? So that's the skill we have. I want you to realize that it's still the same as the one above it. We take the middle term, cut it in half, square it, and we fill in the blank. But we filled in the blank, and we have to add that to the other side also. And you can continue to x factor that one side like we did here. Okay, and rewrite it so that something squared equals 240. Alright, the next skill is we're going to solve this equation. We have a set of parentheses squared equals a number. Now, we're going to use the idea that we would take the square root of both sides. Okay? So here, we square root, but we have to remember plus minus. Okay? This cancels out that square root, so we're left with x plus 7 equals plus or minus the square root of 16. Well, the square root of 16 is 4. So now we have plus or minus 4. Again, that plus minus needs to be in there, and it continues throughout the problem. And we subtract 7 from both sides. So x equals negative 7 plus or minus 4. That's really negative 7 plus 4 and negative 7 minus 4. Negative 7 plus 4 is negative 3, and negative 7 minus 4 is negative 11. So there would be our two answers. That's how we would solve for x. We're going to do another one. I realize my writing has kind of gotten in there. But we have parentheses 10 minus x squared equals 37. To get rid of the square, we take the square root of both sides. Remember the plus minus. Square and the square root cancel, so now we have x minus 10 equals plus or minus the square root of 37. Square root of 37 is not going to break down, it's a prime number. So we're going to go ahead and add 10, and x equals 10 plus or minus the square root of 37. Those don't combine, so really my answers are 10 plus the square root of 37 and 10 minus the square root of 37. Okay? Those are my two answers to this problem. That's the next skill you have to know. Okay? In our next example, or next skill, we're going to solve for x. And we're starting to put all of this together. We're almost to an example where we complete the square. Okay? So, what we need to do here is we need to fill in that blank. So we're going to divide by 2. 16 divided by 2 is 8, and we're going to square that. 8 squared is 64. Now I added it to the blank, so I need to add it to this side. So I'm left with x squared plus 16x plus 64 equals 17 plus 64, and that's 81. Now I'm going to x factor this like we did before. 64 on top, 16 on the bottom. Two numbers on the sides, I need to multiply to 64 but add to 16. Those are 8 and 8. I'm going to rewrite it, x plus 8 times x plus 8, which can be rewritten as x plus 8 squared, and that equals 81. I'm going to rewrite this up here. So we have x plus 8 squared equals 81. This is the skill we just did. I'm going to square root both sides. put a plus minus, can't forget my plus minus. Square and the square root cancel, so I'm left with x plus 8 equals plus or minus the square root of 81. Well, the square root of 81 is really 9. So now I have x plus 8 equals plus or minus 9. Subtract 8. So x equals negative 8 plus or minus 9. Negative 8 plus 9, negative 8 minus 9. Well, negative 8 plus 9 is 1. Negative 8 minus 9 is negative 17. So there's the two answers to my problem. Now, if you understood that example there, that's basically completing the square. That's everything we're going to do. We've combined all of those skills we just did into one problem, and we've solved and we've got an answer. Okay? We're going to do an example here. I'm going to walk you through it, and then this is the end of this video, and you'll have another video that'll do 2 more examples with you. Okay? Alright, notice here we have x squared plus 4x minus 12 equals 0. This equals 0. All the other examples, the one we did just before it, did not equal 0. So our first step, and this is really the only difference, the only thing we haven't done yet, is to move that 12 to the other side. So now we have x squared plus 4x, I'm going to draw my blank, equals 12. Now it looks exactly like the type of problem that we just did. Okay? Everything is the same. The only extra step was moving that 12 to the other side. I'm going to divide this by 2. 4 divided by 2 is 2, and I'm going to square it. So plus 4. I added it to the left, so I need to add it to the right. Now I have x squared plus 4x plus 4 equals 12 plus 4 is 16. I'm going to x factor the left. 4 on the top, 4 on the bottom, 2 numbers that multiply to 4 but add to 4, so 2 and 2. So I have x plus 2 times x plus 2, which becomes x plus 2 squared, and that equals 16. Now I square root both sides, and I remember my plus minus. My square and square root cancel, so I don't need parentheses. X plus 2 equals plus or minus the square root of 16. Square root of 16 is really 4, so now this is plus minus 4. Subtract 2 from both sides. Notice that I'm always putting this in front, minus 2 plus or minus 4. Okay, that's important. Always put that out in front. And we're going to solve this now. Negative 2 plus 4, negative 2 minus 4, negative 2 plus 4 is 2, negative 2 minus 4 is negative 6. So there's the two answers to our problem. And that's the process of completing the square. Now, if you have a question over any of the specific skills, I want you to go back and watch and see if you can figure out what we did. If you're good and this makes sense to you, then go ahead and watch the next video where we'll have 2 more examples.